Always excited to talk to our pal, Adam Schefter, as he joins us each and every Wednesday here on Gabe and Chewy. Good morning, Adam.
Gabe and Chewy, what's going on today?
Pretty good. We're hanging out. Just had a buddy of ours getting ready for hockey season with the Milwaukee Admirals here, but obviously the NFL in full swing. And a report coming out yesterday, and I feel like this is something that just continues to gain momentum each and every year, Adam, where, apparently Caleb Williams is looking to potentially get some ownership stake in whatever team drafts him. It was something Aaron Rodgers was reportedly interested in. Those were always rumors floating around Tom Brady during his free agency before he settled on Tampa Bay. It seems like high-profile players are looking for a piece of the franchise that they ultimately play in, which is not legal currently in the NFL. Is this something that players are going to continue to fight for? Because I have a hard time imagining the people who have made billions of dollars owning these teams just giving up ownership stakes.
Yeah, well, I didn't see that report. I didn't read the story. I'd like to read it just to see what it is. But let me just say this. I don't see that happening anytime soon. However, I will say that I do think that players, particularly these college players, they have more power, as they should, than ever before, because they have the ability to make NIL money. So Caleb Williams, if he doesn't like the team that has the number one pick, can just say, you know what, I'm going to go make millions of dollars back at USC next year, and I'll go into the draft the next year. And, oh, by the way, if he comes out the next year and it's another team he doesn't like, he can just say, you know what, I'm going to do advertisements and sit it out a year. Now, again, does he want to do that? Would that be practical? No. But it could reach a year later. Like, there are things that he could do to avoid going to a certain place that he absolutely doesn't want to go to. Is he going to get an ownership stake for a rookie who's never done anything? I can't imagine that. I'd have to read the story to see more. But, yeah, there's been talk about that for a long period of time. It's never happened. The rules are against it. I don't know what it would take to change it. I know that he's a generational talent and prospect, but I just don't know that rule is going to change here or anytime soon for anybody.
Has it ever happened with like a GM, Adam? Because I thought when Washington or Cleveland was courting Ron Wolf back in the day, they were willing to give him a little ownership stake. Has it ever happened with a GM before?
Not as a GM, not that I remember. Let me say this. I've heard this type of thing come up in conversations. Oh, maybe this guy should go for a piece of the team. Like, I've heard that before with elite talent. I don't know that it's ever been done. As a player, you can't do it because it's hard to value that in relation to the salary cap. So if you I'm making this up, 1% of a franchise, okay, well, what is the value of that? Like, how does that count against the cap?
Yeah.
So it's difficult to measure that against the salary cap, and it just complicates a muddled situation, and it's just one more reason why I don't see that happening anytime soon, if ever.
Well, yeah, and that's, because it clearly would have to count against the cap, and another reason why I think the owners wouldn't do it, because then if you know, okay, 1% of the franchise is worth this against the cap, that's giving a little peek into the finances, which every owner hates, and I feel, the only team that makes their finances available because they have to is here in Wisconsin with the Green Bay Packers, and when they have the stock owners meeting and that whole thing, but even that information over the last few years, Adam's been limited because owners just do not want that information getting out there.
Well, it's interesting because Tom Brady has not been approved as a limited minority owner of the Raiders. And my understanding is that it has something to do with the fact that he was given a certain share at a certain price. The value of the franchise has risen. And because it's risen so high, he's getting it devalued in a way that it makes the league uncomfortable. And I think the Raiders are like, well, we don't really care. He's Tom Brady. We want him to be a part of this team. We want him as a owner. And the league has kind of said, hold on, slow your roll here. Let's figure out how to work this to make this financially responsible, which, again, he's out of the sport. He's not playing, and it's difficult to execute that transaction.
So, Adam, I read a report that an NFL exec said when it comes to playing surface, they want a more uniform playing surfaces. So you would know more about this than I would. But me reading between the lines here, I see the owner saying fine, we'll have more uniform playing surfaces, and we're going to negotiate this when we come to the table for the next CBA, which translates, because I think they're going to want a lot, which means an 18th game or the players getting less of a percentage when it comes to a piece of the pie. Am I off base here, or?
Well, I think we're 7 years away from a CBA, and the new PA or the NFLPA just hired a new executive director, Lloyd Howe. And so I think, again, it's a long ways away from happening. But to your point, Chewy, I would say that would sound about right. The last time it was very important for the players to get time off and to have shorter off seasons and lighter off seasons and less work and all those things like that. And they got all that. And I think they'll never say it, but I think the owners are happy to say, okay, wait. Let me get this straight here. You want more days off. You want lighter off. Okay, and we get what we want financially. Okay, yeah, well, we'll do that deal. So now if you want to bake the field conditions, uniform field conditions into the equation, yeah, if that means, okay, well, maybe we're going to have a team in London now. Maybe we're going to play a Super Bowl in London now. Maybe we're going to have more international games. Maybe whatever. Yeah, they're all bargaining chips in a negotiation that's years away from happening. But yes, that's certainly possible. Now, I hate to be that cynical. It should be that simple as, hey, if this enhances player safety, this should be done, period. But it doesn't always work like that, unfortunately.
We're excited here as we talk with Adam Schefter, ESPN NFL insider, here on Jen, Gabe, and Chewy, because Aaron Jones is going to be presumably returning and hopefully be available for the Packers this weekend against the Denver Broncos. But we had just kind of a conversation yesterday, Adam, about if the Packers should be buyers or sellers. And I just feel like their roster is in an interesting spot where they're not going to want to give up anything to be buyers because they're rebuilding and they've gone with this youth movement. And also, they don't have a lot of veterans that they would necessarily sell off because they have so many young pieces. If they decided to, okay, we're going to be sellers and we're going to, ship off some of these pieces, the one attractive piece they have would be Aaron Jones. If Aaron Jones were somehow in a hypothetical world be available on the open market, what would the Packers be able to get in return for him?
Well, let me backtrack and say this. When Jonathan Taylor's name was on the market, who was connected to him? The Green Bay Packers and the Miami Dolphins. And I don't think either team ever got overly serious about it. Okay, so we had the Packers and the Dolphins. There really was not another team that was interested in Jonathan Taylor. So Aaron Jones is making upwards of $11+ million this year. Who needs a running back right now that would be willing to trade that level of compensation for a guy on an expiring contract? Like, I don't see it. Dallas would be great, but is Green Bay going to trade Aaron Jones to Dallas? I don't see that. Did Dallas ever express interest in Jonathan Taylor, despite the fact that every prognosticator out there is saying, well, Dallas is the one that makes the most sense? Yeah, it does. Dallas would make Jonathan Taylor, would have fit great in Dallas. Dallas never made a call. Okay, do I think Dallas is making a call on Aaron Jones? I don't. I think they're going to continue to lean on Tony Pollard, Rico Dowdle, Malik Davis, Deuce Vaughn, all the guys they have on their roster. They feel like they're good. And by the way, let's say Dallas was interested. Okay, what are they giving up for a running back, again, who makes the money he does, who's on an expiring contract? Not very much. Certainly not enough to make it worth the time of the Green Bay Packers. So, again, there's always scenarios that come up, and we could see a team this weekend, a contending team, lose a running back, where all of a sudden they're in the market and say, okay, like, by the way, the Miami Dolphins, who, again, were linked to Jonathan Taylor, let's say they wanted Aaron Jones. What do you think they would be willing to give up to go get him? I don't think it'd be enough to make the Packers want to trade him. So I don't see that as a practical solution, but let's see what happens and changes here in the next couple of weeks before the October 31st trade deadline.
So, Adam, before this weekend, I thought San Francisco was the top dog, and there was not a sizable gap, but a gap between them and the next tier of teams. With that loss this weekend, did that kind of bring them back to the rest of the pack? And you have maybe eight. I look at it like 8 or 9 potential Super Bowl teams right now.
Well, here's the thing. I think that San Francisco and Philadelphia both lost games that neither franchise thought it would. Both teams made mistakes at certain spots that neither team usually does. And so this just happens during the course of the season. You want to limit those types of losses. Like, nobody would have thought the Eagles would lose to the Jets. And the Niners, listen, Cleveland played a game without its starting quarterback. You beat arguably the best team in the NFL with P.J. Walker playing quarterback. The Niners, at the end of the game, had the game won. The ref made a bad call, extended a drive that should have been over. Game should have been over. He called a unnecessary roughness penalty that wasn't unnecessary roughness from the safety. Gibson led with his shoulder, not his helmet, and they called that as a penalty. The Niners missed 2 field goals. That's what happens to the good teams when they lose. They cost themselves. They beat themselves as much as the other team beats them. And that's what happened here with the Niners and the Eagles, who I still view as the top 2 dogs. Now, I will say this. To me, they're the best teams in the NFC. I don't think Detroit is that far off from them. They might be a notch below just because they don't have the history of it right now. But Detroit has been very impressive every time anybody's watched them this season. They continue to rack up wins. They win in Tampa on Sunday, a big win. And I don't think Detroit is all that far behind, if any, San Francisco and Philly.
Adam, before we let you go, I mentioned earlier we had my friend who's an admiral's assistant in studio to join us earlier today. He has a Canadian accent. He was born and raised there. And Chewy was fascinated. Yes, exactly. Chewy was fascinated by it, and he posed this question. If you had to have one of the following accents, which would you choose? A Canadian accent or a Southern accent?
Canadian.
That was pretty quick and decisive, Adam. Why are you going with the Canadian accent?
Well, I was expecting you to say something like European and British, and I certainly would have sided with that because, my wife thinks in a previous world that's where she lived, and she just loves that kind of thing. And so that might have worked out well. But I just think there's something a little bit elegant about the Canadian accents that I kind of like. And so I just sided with that right away.
There we go. There you have it. Adam, we always appreciate the insight. We appreciate you playing along with us. Can't wait to talk to you again next week.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great week. We'll talk next Wednesday.